Hello, welcome to the Troubadour podcast. Tonight, I wanted to read The Castaway. This is a poem that I did a recording for several years ago when I lived in San Antonio before I went to California and came back on my voyage. And I wanted to try an experiment if I haven't read this poem since then. And I wanted to try it again. And if you're interested, I hope you will join live. And if not, you can listen to this later. But I wanted to go through this and see what I remembered, what came up, what, if anything new connections, things of that nature. I keep a long list of poems that I've enjoyed for one reason or another. And I like to revisit them from time to time. Sometimes I don't have I forget for years and it's been a long time. And it's a good time to reflect on this one. This one, The Castaway, I do know is a very sad, tragic, melancholy poem. If you're in a good mood, maybe you don't want to stick around. I don't blame you. If you are feeling a little lonely, maybe this is a good one to kind of reflect on that loneliness, to think about it. Hopefully that will help you to purge it and find some ways to connect with people. Because this is a poem, A Castaway, is a poem about being cast away. If you've seen the movie Tom Hanks's Castaway, you know loneliness, depression, suicidal thoughts play a major role in that movie. Of course, that movie was many, many years after this poem. This poem is published in 1799 by the poet William Cowper, one of the important but less prominent than some poets, romantic poets of the late 1700s. He read an account of George Anson's famous voyage around the world, around the globe. And I don't know the full story, except that I know that it was 8 squadron ships were out on this mission during a war, and it only something like less than 190 of the men survived out of almost 2,000. And there was an account of this voyage published in, I think, 1748, and it was a very popular account. This, eventually made its way to William Cowper, the poet, and he read of a particular moment in prose, in a, nonfiction book. He read of this moment of a man being thrown overboard, and it struck a chord. Now, this poem that I'll be reading is one of a very famous romantic poem. And I think it captures the mood of loneliness, of not knowing, what's going to happen, where your place in, the world is, what your connection with other people is, and just the entire mood of melancholy, of loneliness, of disconnection. So what I'm going to do this time that's a little different than last time is I will actually do a reading. I think there are going to be some references that you're not familiar with. It's going to be a little tricky your first time, but I hope you'll listen to just listen to the words, enjoy the words, enjoy the sounds, enjoy what you can get out of it. And then we'll go through it stanza by stanza. And of course, you can look this up and read along if you don't want to, or if you're listening, just Google Castaway by William Cowper. That's Cowper. And it will be everywhere. In fact, you might even see my post on this many years ago, which does pop up. Okay, so let me do a reading of this. It's not super long. It's not super short. It'll take a couple minutes. and just sit back, listen, enjoy, and then we'll go through it. And if something doesn't make sense, that's okay. It's part of what happens when you read poetry. I've read this many times, and a lot of it still doesn't make sense to me. Okay. The Castaway by William Cowper. Obscurest night involved the sky. The Atlantic billows roared, when such a destined wretch as I washed headlong from on board. Of friends, of hope, of all bereft, his floating home forever left. No braver chief could Albion boast than he with whom he went, nor ever ship left Albion's coast with warmer wishes sent. He loved them both, but both in vain, nor him beheld, nor her again. Not long beneath the whelming brine, expert to swim he lay, nor soon he felt his strength decline, or courage die away, but waged with death a lasting strife, supported by despair of life. He shouted, nor his friends had failed to check the vessel's course, but so the furious blast prevailed, that pitiless perforce. They left their outcast mate behind, and scudded still before the wind. Some succor yet they could afford, and, such as storms allow, the cask, the coop, the floated cord, delayed not to bestow. But he, they knew, nor ship nor shore, whate'er they gave, should visit more. Nor, cruel as it seemed, could he their haste himself condemn, aware that flight in such a sea alone could rescue them. Yet bitter felt it still to die, deserted, and his friends so nigh. He long survives, who lives an hour in ocean, self-upheld, and so long he, with unspent power, his destiny repelled, and ever, as the minutes flew, entreated help or cried, adieu. At length, his transient respite past, his comrades, who before had heard his voice in every blast, could catch the sound no more. For then, by toil subdued, he drank the stifling wave, and then he sank. No poet wept him, but the page of narrative sincere that tells his name, his worth, his age, is wet with Anson's tear. And tears by bards or heroes shed alike immortalize the dead. I therefore purpose not, or dream, descanting on his fate, to give the melancholy theme a more enduring date. But misery still delights to trace its semblance in another's case. No voice divine the storm allayed, no light propitious shone, when, snatched from all effectual aid, we perished, each alone. But I beneath a rougher sea, and whelmed in deeper gulfs than he. So again, not a happy poem, but I think not all of life is a constant stream of happiness. That's not to say we shouldn't try to achieve happiness, but sometimes it helps, at least for me, to think about moments and aspects of life when things are not happy and things are lonely and tragic in order to reinforce the greater moments of our lives, to help us enjoy those. And when we are in those moments of sadness, to move, to give us a reason to move toward something else, to get out of there, to escape the castaway. when reading a poem like this, I don't know if my reading was the best because it's been a while since I've read it. I didn't really prepare. But so what I would normally do, and hopefully you'll enjoy going through the process with me, is, I would do a reading like that, even by myself, just I do readings like that. And then I'll go through it and kind of take some notes and kind of think about what I think is going on and looking up some words. So there are words I don't know. And I'll be, kind of looking them up. And I have a little iPad down here. So it opens up, it's called The Castaway, and it opens up by obscurest night involved the sky, the Atlantic billows roared. Now, billow is basically just a large wave, a sea wave. So we're setting the scene. This is Cooper setting the scene. It's on the Atlantic Ocean. There's a big billowing wave. You can think of stormy weathers because it's obscurest night. So it's not just an obscure night. Words matter. It's not just an obscure night. It's obscurest. But it's the obscurest night involved the sky. That the Atlantic billows roared when such a destined wretch as I washed headlong from on board of friends, of hope, of all bereft. And that basically just means, lacking something, like having something taken from you. So of friends, of hope, of all bereft, his floating home forever left. Now I think the narration here is a little interesting. Who's the narrator? Who's actually talking here? Obscurest night involved the sky. So, when such a destined, so this is kind of, he's referring to his fate to have this happen to him. Now, by the way, there is that feeling, and I think we have to, even if we don't philosophically agree with something like, it's your fate to die in this way, that there's some gods and fate happening to kind of align your moment right here, that this is how you're going to, in this case, die, or lose your job, or lose a girlfriend, or other bad things, get just a sickness where you're not going to die, but things are bad for a little while, have financial stress, whatever it is. It can feel like this is your fate. It can feel like this is, like this was your destiny. Like, oh my God, the world is against me. So I really, I think that the emotion here is correct. If you were to fall overboard, you would cry to the heavens, why me, God? Why me? Right? Isn't that a common thing we say? When such a destined wretch as I washed headlong from on board of friends, of hope, of all bereft, taken from me, his floating home forever left. So who's his floating home? So it says such a wretch as I, but then it says his floating home forever left. So it's almost like there's a split there. I mean, unless I'm reading that incorrectly, it's an interesting connection. I don't know what you think. Let me know in the comments if you think, is this the narrator saying he left the home or he was washed off? Or is it, like we saw at the end of this poem, there's a kind of indication that the poet is actually putting himself in the shoes of this person, but he's saying at the end that he has it worse than this person who's been washed overboard. So the next stanza, no braver chief could Albion boast. Now, Albion is something that refers to Britain, by the way. Particularly it refers, and it's a way of thinking about ancient Britain. So it's, just kind of this fairy tale land almost of, Albion's boast. No braver chief could Albion boast. So it's Britain we can think of. So never in the history of Britain could a braver chief go out than he with whom he went. So then he, the captain of the ship, is who this is referring to. Nor ever a ship left Albion's coast with warmer wishes sent. So in other words, this is a good ship. And this, by the way, refers to what I talked about at the very beginning, George Anson's voyage, who was a commodore, famous commodore, because he had more than one ship, so he was a commodore. It's a good ship. It's a good captain. So there's not negligence leading to, fellow falling overboard. It's not like someone making some kind of mistake. I'm in the process of reading right now, rereading the Aeneid by Virgil. And in that poem, there is a castaway. There is a man who the god Sleep, Discord, kind of comes down to the pilot of one of Aeneas's ships and, forces, even though this person's trying to stay awake, forces him to fall asleep. And he falls asleep, falls overboard, and dies. And that's, by the way, what kind of made me think of, I need to revisit this poem. But it's a good captain, a good ship. Nor ever ship left Albion's coast, remember Britain's coast, with warmer wishes sent. He loved them both. So I assume he's talking about Albion's coast and Albion's boast, which is the ship. He loved them both, but both in vain. So loving the ship, loving Britain didn't matter, nor him beheld, nor her again. So they don't see each other ever again. It didn't stop the disaster. To love the ship, to be a good captain, to be a good shipmate. Everything was right. And this still happened to him. Everything was done right. And this still happened to him. That, I think, is really important too, that you could do everything right and something bad can happen to you. I know Ayn Rand had an interesting concept of the malevolent universe premise and the benevolent universe premise. This is probably an example of the malevolent universe premise in a sense. But the reality is that this did happen. Right? This is a reality. So this can happen. And that's, of course, that's if you know what I'm talking about with Ayn Rand's concept of malevolent and benevolent universe premise. It's not that bad things cannot happen, but it's that in a sense, and I'm kind of paraphrasing this or making it simpler than it is. In a sense, good things, with right action, good things can happen. It's possible. The universe isn't like this nasty monster out to get you. Here, I think there is a kind of sense that it is in a way that the universe, no matter how good you are, no matter how good your ship is, stuff like this still can happen. Now, of course, that's true. The stuff like this can happen. So it is a kind of tragedy, but I think it's part of the reality. Okay, so let's keep going. Not long beneath the whelming brine, engulfing seawater is what I would say there. Engulfing seawater. Not long beneath the whelming brine, expert to swim he lay. And I want you to think about that for a second. This is what poetry does. It forces you to think. Right? So I could just tell you the answer, but what do you think it means? Take a moment, pause the video, or if you're listening to this podcast as an audio later, pause it and think. Not long beneath the whelming brine, expert to swim he lay. Okay, you probably got it now, right? He's laying there, or he's maybe backstroke, or he's doing some kind of stroking, not long beneath he's trying to keep up, right? He's trying to keep his head above water. And the rest of the stanza really helps us with this. Nor soon he felt his strength decline or courage die away, but waged with death a lasting strife, supported by despair of life. Now, this is a very poignant statement, I think. But waged with death a lasting strife, supported by despair of life. Now, this is a very sad outlook at life, but that is, if you were a castaway and in this situation, we're going to find out how horrific this situation is, that this man is doomed to die. He knows he's doomed to die. There's nothing he can do about it. There's nothing. What happened? There we go. There's nothing he can do about it. It's all gone for him. And, this isn't even it's not modern times when you can fly out helicopters and the Coast Guard and stuff to get him and you throw stuff. This is a storm and we're going to get into how bad it is. So in a sense, he's in I had to think about what does waged with death, a lasting strife really mean? And it's kind of like a Sisyphus is the view that I came up with, as a kind of Sisyphusian aspect is he's being paid in lasting strife. This is my interpretation. Let me know what you think. But he's, in a sense, his wages, and maybe I'm misinterpreting wage. What do you think? But waged with death a lasting strife, supported by despair of life. I mean, one way or the other, you can get this is pretty tragic, right? He's supported, right? He's getting support by what? Despair of life, which in a sense means the lacking of life existing. It's not going to be around anymore. He's going to die. It's a matter of time. It's just a matter of time before he dies. And he's, having this wage with death. Okay, let's go to the next stanza. He shouted, nor his friends had failed to check the vessel's course. But so the furious blast prevailed, that pitiless perforce. They left their outcast mate behind and scudded still before the wind. So, the man, he shouts out to his friends, and they try to rescue him. He shouted, nor his friends had failed to check the vessel's course. But so the furious blast, the wind, prevailed, that pitiless perforce. Now, perforce is a word you're going to see in literature much more than you see in nonfiction, especially today. I think it's a good word that we probably should use more. And it essentially kind of indicates a kind of inevitability. It's by the force of this nature. It's like this is inevitable. This has to happen. It's pushing this vessel away, farther away. It's getting them farther and farther away from their mate. They left their outcast mate behind and scudded still before the wind. But again, it's against their will. They want their friend. They had checked the vessel's course. They had failed to check the vessel's course, and so there's a kind of inevitability of what's happening to him, and they can't do anything. And so we're going to get more of that. They can't do anything. So succor is basically assistance. It's getting help from somebody. Some succor they could afford, and such as storms allow, the cask, the coop, the floated cord, delayed not to bestow. But he, they knew, nor ship nor shore, whatever they gave should visit more. So what they could afford, the assistance they could give as these storms allow, they did. The cask, the coop, the floated cord. So basically a cask, they would so like today, if you think about like a lifesaver, right? That's the kind of common thing with a rope. Well, they would put like a cask, just I'm envisioning a barrel of sorts. And then a rope, floated corded rope. And the coop, I remember I read what this was, and I can't remember exactly what a coop, but essentially the cask, the coop, the floated cord, that's, I think of, again, like a rope, like a lifesaver. They're throwing out everything they can to try to get this. Delayed not to give, to bestow. They delayed not. So they did not delay in giving him these things. But he, the castaway, they, the shipmates, knew he would never see the ship again. He would never see shore again. Whatever they gave should visit more. So all that stuff is in vain. They know it. He knows it. Everybody knows it. It's just a lost cause. They're still going to try, right? Because they want to try, but they know it's a lost cause. Nor, cruel as it seemed, could he their haste himself condemn, aware that flight in such a sea alone could rescue them. So think about this. Nor, cruel as it seemed, could he their haste himself condemn. So he cannot condemn their haste, even though it seemed cruel in a certain sense. It feels cruel that they are, rocketing away from him as fast as possible, right? Why does he not feel this way? Because he is aware that flight in such a sea that is in the obscurest night, in the storm that they're all experiencing, in such a sea alone, in other words, the haste, the speed, the quickness of getting out of there, that's the only way that they could survive. That's the only way that they could live through such a storm, is if they fled as fast as possible from this storm. Yet bitter felt it still to die, deserted, and his friends so nigh. And that always strikes me. That always gets me. That he knows it's not their fault. He understands them. He sympathizes. It's not their fault. We can't morally judge them. They're doing their best. And yet he's still bitter, of course, because he doesn't want to die. And it's even worse because, picture him floating in this turbulent ocean with, he's going up and down with the waves and it's washing over his face and he's feeling deserted. And he could see his friends so nigh, so near. I mean, that is hard. That's difficult, right? I mean, it's horrible enough to die, but just the feeling that it's like right there, I'm so close, but they can't get to me. I could see salvation, but I can't get to it. I think that sometimes is a very powerful, poignant perspective on loneliness, on sadness, on tragedy, on melancholy that a lot of people feel sometimes, is they feel people all around them. They feel that there is something right there, that there's salvation, if they just knew what to do, and people are trying to help, but it doesn't really work. It's not helping really. And you're doomed, at least in this scenario. He long survives who lives an hour in oceans self-upheld, right? If he's swimming by himself, he's self-upheld. His own self-power is what's powering his ability to stay, rather than the ship and the wind or steam power, which will come around the corner, right? Although I think that exists at this point, but it's not on the oceans, as far as I understand. And, but he's self-propelled, he's self-upheld. And it's saying he long survives who lives an hour. So like an hour on the ocean self-upheld is like 50 years of life in a sense. So he's living a life. And I think it's one thing he's saying here. He's living the only life he has left. And so long he, with unspent power, his destiny repelled. So that destiny, the destined wretch, he's repelling it with every kick of his feet, with every flail of his arm in the ocean, to keep upright with the wave. He's repelling it. He's getting rid of it. He's holding it off. And in a sense, I think, if we look at this as a broader metaphor, that's Cooper's vision of life. What did we call it? What did he call it earlier? Supported by despair of life. And ever as the minutes flew, entreated help or cried adieu. Now, I take this, he's repelling his destiny, and ever as the minutes flew, so remember 60, so minutes are flying. That's a metaphor right there, which we use all the time, of course. But this is in the context of an hour is a lifetime. So imagine it's, like your internal clock is sped up and, every minute is like a year of your life and it's like flying by, right? And he's calling, now is he calling for help or is he crying adieu? Maybe he's doing both. At length his transient respite passed. So transient is impermanent. Respite is rest. So at length his transient respite passed. His comrades who before had heard his voice in every blast could catch the sound no more. Now I want you to listen to that again. So at length, impermanent respite, transient respite passed. His comrades who before had heard his voice in every blast could catch the sound no more. And I want you to, think about impermanence, think about resting, think about it's going by. Picture this guy in the ocean, picture the boat floating away. And listen again. Listen and hear the silence. Is what I think is going to happen. At length, his transient respite passed. His comrades, who before had heard his voice in every blast, could catch the sound no more. And I think whenever I read that, I always hear a devastating silence. I can, the transient respite past, his comrades who before, and it's a kind of build and then it kind of fades away. And that's his nature, that's his destiny. And then we get the last two lines of this stanza. For then by toil subdued, he drank the stifling wave, and then he sank. He drank the stifling wave. So we know, of course, that means, I know sailors still use this. They call it the drink, right? They call the ocean the drink. And I think they still do that, many sailors. And I don't know about American sailors, but I've heard that to this day, the drink. And he drank, he's gone. He's past tense. And then he sank. So the wave finally overtook him. So he's gone. The man who was washed overboard, watching his friends flee, but not on purpose. They didn't have a choice. It was the only way they could survive. They tried to help him, but this was it for him. He watched his friends flee. No poet wept him, but the page of narrative sincere that tells his name, his worth, his age, is wet with Anson's tear. So that's a direct reference to the George Anson, I think it's called the voyage, George Anson's Voyage Around the World or Around the Globe or something like that. It's an actual book that was published in 1748. And it mentioned this incident of a man being washed overboard. And so Cooper, the poet of this poem, The Castaway, writes this little, statement to it. No poet wept, so there were no poets on board on this ship, right? You don't bring a poet on a voyage around the world to disrupt the Spanish military or something like that. I think that's what they were doing. No poet wept him, but the page of narrative sincere. So he's giving a compliment to the writer that the narrative and then to Anson that, and this I think goes into what a poet does that's a little different possibly than a writer of nonfiction even, is that the narrator got to some truth of this poignant scene, the sincerity of it that tells just his, the facts, his name, his worth, his age, but it's wet with Anson's tear. That's George Anson, the captain, who shed a tear over this man. And by the way, the 1,000 other men who died on this mission. And tears by bards or heroes shed alike immortalize the dead. So he's giving a real compliment from a poet's perspective. He's giving the power of a poet to, I think, George Anson and the writing of this narrative. I don't know if it's an autobiography. I don't actually know if George Anson wrote this book. Maybe he did. And that's also what he's referring to. He's giving some kind of permanent, or he's giving a certain kind of power that poets have or had. I don't know if they have it anymore, but they did have at the time of elevating certain life situations. And that's what Cooper's doing, by the way. He's taking this moment from a narrative, from a nonfiction biography, describing the scene, and he's elevating it to something metaphorical of all human existence that we all experience from time to time. I therefore purpose not or dream descanting, which I think is like a melodious song. It's an interesting word, descanting. When I think of descanting, I'm thinking of decanting. So I get mixed up with words all the time. Descanting, not decanting like a wine, like decanting a wine bottle. So descanting, I think that's how you pronounce it, is a melodious song. I therefore purpose not, I don't propose or dream to descant on his fate, probably because Anson did a really good job. To give the melancholy theme a more enduring date. So something that will last on forever, which it has. It has had this man, although he's not named in this poem, has kind of been given an immortality in this poem because I'm reading it in 2021, right? And it's a very popular poem. But misery, so this is where the poet and the Cooper, the romantic, this is why romantics, especially English romantics, had a certain, we have a certain view of them as being very melancholy, and because they were. And he has this statement, but misery still delights to trace its semblance in another's case. So I think Cooper is feeling miserable here, the poet. And he is, oh wait, we have a little, thank you, Tom. Let's see if I can get this on here. So, Tom, thank you for your comments. See what you got to say here. Descant an independent treble melody, usually sung or played above a basic melody. I have descanted on the subject before. So yeah, I mean, it has to do with a melody, usually sung or played above a basic melody. Okay. I think it has to do with, what's the second definition? Talk tediously or at length. I have descanted on this. I think it seems like it has to do with both, right? It seems to have to do with the song. He's singing a song of this guy who has not survived, right? Who has been washed overboard. And okay, but thank you, Tom. Thank you for that. It's words are wonderful and they are boring when just in a dictionary, but when they're brought to life with the fine breath of poetry, that's what Cooper's doing. And so I think descanting can take on a couple of things. So I therefore purpose not or dream, descanting on his fate, singing a song tediously or at length. I'm not, or maybe he's just saying, at length. I'm not going to do that. He's saying basically to give the melancholy theme a more enduring date. But, so there's that word, but, what's that saying that everything said before, but doesn't matter, right? So, but misery still delights to trace its semblance in another's case. So he, as the poet, is delighting in a sense. And I do think there's a pleasure. The Romantics called it the sublime. There is a kind of pleasure in, if you've probably felt this even if you're happy or sad and you listen to like sad music and it puts you, and there is a pleasant feeling to it. It's not that you want to be sad, but there's a strong emotion that you're feeling. But in this case, I think he's going even a little bit stronger because he's saying misery delights to trace its semblance in another's case. And, do you think that's true? I mean, that is an interesting statement. Does misery delight to trace its semblance? So basically I see, Tom is miserable. I get to have some pleasure in delighting and tracing his misery, right? And so Cooper, and that's not true. Tom is not miserable. Tom is doing great. I'm just kidding. But, the misery of this castaway is a delight in a sense. It's a kind of sublime pleasure that Cooper is tracing through the case of this character. Okay, last stanza. No voice divine the storm allayed, no light propitious shone, when, snatched from all effectual aid, we perished each alone. But I beneath a rougher sea, and whelmed in deeper gulfs than he. Does not end with a happy note. Starts sad, gets sad and tragic, ends tragically. So no voice divine, the storm diminished, allayed, I think diminished is a good word. No light favorable or propitious shone. So this is by the way, this is a year before Cooper dies. I think he might be, there's always, when we look back at these poets who write these great poems like John Keats, like right before they die, and we'd sometimes read into it a little bit. Like, did he know he was dying? Is this a kind of cry out for help? I don't know enough about Cooper's biography to know if he was sick or how he died actually. But no voice divine, the storm diminished, no light favorable shone. So, I mean, what do you think that means? Think about that for a second. So the voice, the storm did not diminish a divine voice. Or maybe it means that no divine voice was able to shine through at all. No light propitious shone. Like there's no light on this situation. There's no universal theme he's maybe clocking in. Although I do think there is a kind of universal emotion he's capturing. When snatched from all effectual aid, we perished each alone. This could be a kind of caveat claim for the, an elegy to the other 1,000 men who died. That maybe that's what he's saying. But then he ends, I think nothing saved him, Tom says. I agree. Yeah, I think that's no voice divine, the storm allayed, no light propitious shone. Nothing saved him is an easy way, I think, to put that, and I would agree with that. When snatched from all effectual aid, we perished each alone. I think he's talking about humanity. I think he's talking about we all die alone at the end of the day. Even if you're, like the Notebook, the two old people in the Notebook dying in each other's arms, really at the end of the day, because we're, all of us are alone. We're all in our own heads. No matter how intimate you can be with somebody, they can never be in your head completely. We all die alone. We all perish each alone. But, of course, Cooper's not going to be one-upped by humanity, but I beneath a rougher sea and whelmed in deeper gulfs than he. So I think he's ending it with this statement that he, Cooper, is even worse off than this guy who was thrown overboard. And that is a hell of a statement, right? That is only something a poet can do. This all, they have this reputation of, oh, woe is me. And now you kind of, this is where this reputation comes from, is like, really, dude? Like, is it really that bad? But poets have that ability. And I think, people with a romantic temperament have that ability of it being like this great tragedy and everything that happens to them is put into grander terms. The flip side of that, of course, is that they are above these types of poets. The people who live like this, I do think, and I would argue, they experience life more than the rest of us. They're above average livers of life. They experience the ups more and the downs more. But that means that they experience more intensely. It's, more in them. And that's one of the things that I like about the poets is even when they're talking about something really tragic and sad like this, they are feeling it. They're not ashamed of feeling it. Or sometimes they're actually, but they're feeling it as intensely as humanly possible and some. And I think that can teach us how to live a little bit because we experience the world through our emotions. That's an important message to get from poetry. And from this poem, I think we all feel frustration, hopelessness, loneliness. And I think that's what he's feeling. And he could, put some kind of witty line at the end, but that would shatter this poem. This poem, just like if you see a sad painting that it's all around this one theme, it's all congealed around this one theme, it all demonstrates that one thing. That's what art can do. It's not to say maybe Cooper had some more positive things to say, or, he maybe the next day after he wrote this, he was chirpier and happy. It's not to say that, but that's what, that's what's great about poetry and about art is that it hones in on a moment of life, an experience. This is an experience, and this is it as intensely as possible. The feeling of hopelessness, which we all feel. Now, does that mean you have to, have it on your wall and think about it every minute? I mean, that's up to you. I have this melancholy guy behind me, Mr. Wordsworth, the great poet, William Wordsworth, but that's because I like it so much, and I love not his melancholy, but his contemplativeness. I think that more contemplation. So Tom, thank you for your comments. Tom says, I definitely strive to experience life like this. Sometimes I reach it, but not always. I wonder if it's good to have it as a goal. It's a good question. I don't know if it's good to have it as a goal necessarily. I mean, it depends what you mean by having it as a goal. Like, how do you, I don't even know how you would have that as a goal. Like, I'm going to feel more intensely today. I think what you can have a goal is setting yourself setting up an environment where you can build the kind of intensity. And the way to do that is through art. I don't know another way to do it. I'm sure there are other ways, and maybe psychologists can have some recommendations. I think art is the primary way to intensify your life when things are getting dreary in your life, which they will. If you don't involve yourself in great music, I'm going to go see The Marriage of Figaro this Sunday, right? Great opera. Tom, we should just bring you on the show. We're just having a conversation at this point. Tom says, I think being able to feel things in your life more intensely is something you can control. Art and egoism are both good conduits in my opinion. Yeah, I definitely agree. So I think there's something very powerful in, I guess if you're saying by egoism, like the philosophy of living for yourself, yeah, absolutely. I think, with rational long-term goals, yeah, 100%. How to actually intensify your emotions. Your emotions are byproduct of previously chewed thoughts. One way to chew thoughts in a contemplative realm, and in a different realm, is through art. And, I think, if you think about it, like when we fall in love, especially when we're young, but even when you're older, if it's real love, you tend to feel that intensely, and you feel other things more intensely. And I don't just mean sex, although sex is part of it. You've definitely, your sex is intensified, but I think your experience of just people around you, the air you breathe, the food you eat, everything when in that state is elevated. And I think art can do that in all areas of your life on a regular basis. And my argument is simply to add art into your life on a regular basis. And over time, because again, emotions are the byproducts of you chewing and thinking through and contemplating the world. And this is a great way to, contemplate the world. So again, when we look at Castaway by Cooper, we're contemplating frustration, and we're thinking about it in a very concrete, metaphorical way. And he has words that help us understand all of it and help us grasp it and see it and feel it for ourselves. You should feel, if you read this poem, and if you listen to me, I hope I did an okay job reading it. You should feel yourself bobbing up and down in that ocean, seeing your friends flee from you, trying to help you, knowing you're doomed, you're doomed, and you're, using every element of your power to prop yourself up. That image should be in your head as that's frustration, hopelessness, and loneliness. That's particularly frustration and hopelessness. That's what that feels like. That's what that is. That is hopelessness. So when we feel that feeling, we should have that image in our head. That's one image to have, and that will intensify for better or for worse. And it can even make you feel it. Now, hopefully you don't really feel it, forever. And this is not an emotion you want to be in, this kind of state of hopelessness. But, the point is that life has a lot of experiences. And for me, I think I want to experience all of them. But, I don't want to stay in a state of hopelessness. So, we want to experience love, admiration, goal setting, enjoyment of nature, enjoyment of buildings and doing things and thinking and so on. Okay, so thank you, Tom. We should have just brought you on the show and chatted. Thank you for your comments. That was very nice. And I'm going to sign off. And hopefully, if you guys haven't already, go to troubadourmag.com or go to Spotify and look up Troubadour Podcast. And I have a lot of poems that I've done over the years, including Castaway. I've done Castaway several years ago. This was me returning to it. I actually don't know how much was it the exact same thing? I'll have to go back and compare the two. Maybe it's the same thing. Last comment by Tom. Thank you. Classing the place up. No, I'm kidding. Hell yeah, he says. Intensity. And we'll end there. All right. Thank you. See you next time.